Do you want to increase your rating? Well, I will show you principles on how to play the opening, how to play the middle game, and some endgame tips in this game, so stay tuned. And we enter a Queen's Gambit variation with knight to f6 and bishop to g5, always pinning the knight. A standard setup. And tips for the opening: there's 3 golden rules. Make sure to have a pawn in the center, develop your pieces like I'm doing, and bring your king to safety by castling. Here, bishop to e7, trying to develop, and castling as well. I take the pawn. This is the exchange variation of the Queen's Gambit. This is not an option, because then my opponent takes here, and black is slightly better. Simply take the bishop, and now the move e4. And after takes, I already have a great center. But black will try to counter it, right? So if your opponent has a great center, try to counter it in this kind of positions with e5, with c5. It's very important, because otherwise white, me in this example, will simply have too much space. So you need to counter the center. Here, black castles first, and I develop my knight. I need to develop. The queen is already on the same file as my king, right? And if the center opens up, then I'm very weak, so I need to develop very fast, but I'm still on time here. c5, yes, great move. Also an option would have been e5, giving up the pawn, and if I would take knight to d7 is very strong. Because after takes, this pawn falls, right? With a check. Or if I go here, the same pawn falls. And this is equal. But my opponent went for the c5 break, also a great move, and bishop to d3 would have been a good approach, but I was a bit afraid of rook to e8 at some point and a lot of pressure on this pawn, so I thought let's go for bishop e2 instead, and maybe I can push the pawn because my queen is still defending my pawn at this point. And I make room for castling over here. b6. Also a good move, making room for the bishop to attack another weakness. You always want to go for weaknesses, and that's a great choice for my opponent. I castle, get my king out of the file and into safety, and here bishop to b7. Now, what is my best move here? There's only one move that keeps an advantage, and it's not queen to c2, protecting this pawn. No, because then rook c8 is a good move, and black threatens to take, and my queen is pinned here. No, the best move and the most active move, so you always want to look for the most active approaches, right? Go forward, d5. I don't defend the pawn. No, but it's not attacked now anymore, because this pawn blockades the attack of this bishop on the e4 pawn. Black brings the rook in the game, and now c4, stabilizing my center. And I have a good center. But if your opponent has such a strong center, you look for ways to attack the base of the pawn chain. And that's by going b5 or f5 at some point. And then these pawns need to make choices. What am I gonna do? Do I keep defending the d5 pawn, or do I take a pawn? And my opponent challenges my center right away with the move f5. Very important, keep on challenging that center. Here, queen to c2. Great move, getting out of the pin of the rook, defending the pawn, and making room for the rooks to join the party. So this is also an attacking move. Although it's a defensive move, it's an attacking move as well. A very active move. Now the knight goes to d7, and my opponent would love to bring the knight to f6. The best move in this position would have been bishop to d3. And knight here doesn't really work, because I simply bring the rook into the game. And look at this. This queen is not defended. This pawn is also quite weak, right? And white is winning here. But I played another move, and I went for rook f to e1. Another great middle game principle is that you want to bring your rooks to open files. It's not open yet, but you see how it could easily open up already, right? And then this rook is already very well placed. You also want to bring this rook here at some point and get great files for your rooks. Here my opponent takes, and I take back. Note that this pawn is now being pinned, right? Because the queen is not protected. Loose pieces drop off. The queen is loose, not protected, so it drops off. The pawn cannot take this pawn. Knight to f6, asking me questions. Will I take or will I go back? Best would have been to go back, but I thought that this kind of positions might look a bit strong for black. The bishop has a good diagonal now. The knight is quite active, will draw back at some point. and the rook is already on the open file as well. So that's why I went for the other choice and I took the pawn. Queen to e6, check, takes back, and I thought there might be ways for me to hold on to this pawn, but let's see if I'm able to. My opponent plays rook to e8 and asks me how I'm going to defend this pawn. Ideally, maybe the bishop goes here, but that's not an option because my own pawn is there. I can defend it with my rook, for example by going bishop to f1 or bishop to d3, but you know, the rooks will double up, the bishop will get here, and this pawn falls sooner or later. But I had a different plan in mind and I calculated it all the way through. There is another and more active approach. Knight to g5. Great move. Protecting this pawn. But you might think, what if h6? Kick away the defender right away, and if you go back, well then the pawn hangs. Yes, but there's another move. Bishop to f3. Attacking this bishop, and if you take now, then I take here, and I can always go back and defend this pawn. And these pawns are weak, the double pawns. This is winning for white. And if black takes, then my pawn is guarded now. This would have been the best option for my opponent, but my opponent went rook to b8, protecting the bishop. And thinking that after takes, the rook will go here and win the pawn. But according to my calculations, that is not true. And we will find out why. So I take the bishop, the rook takes back, and what's the best move in this position? There's only one move that keeps a huge advantage for white. The rook is threatening to go here. What is the best move? Knight to f7. Great defensive move. I go forward, but it's a great defensive move. Sounds counterintuitive, but it's not, because if the rook goes here and my opponent played this move, do you see the best move in this position? Yes, knight to d6, attacking the base rook. So if you take here, you simply take this rook. And we're in exchange up. Or even a rook up. So the rook has to move. Now, knight to f5 is a good move as well. Kicking away the other rook, going back. But I thought my knight was a bit weak here. But f4 is a good approach for me. Instead, I played the other rook to d1. And my opponent goes back with a knight and I need to make a choice. This doesn't work, by the way, right? Because you can simply take this pawn. And if I take here, checkmate. So I need to watch out for my back rank. It's not working. I simply give up the pawn. So I have to take the knight, takes back, and now my rook slides in, protecting this pawn now twice. And the plan of my opponent is to bring the king over here and win this pawn. But I thought I would be on time to create enough counterplay. And I spotted another very important detail about how to win with this setup. And I will show you later a very important and interesting setup I will achieve in a few moves to prevent my opponent from progressing with these pawns. Here, g6, and I play king to f1. Trying to get my king into the game, but f4 would have been a good move. Because in the end, in this position, I'm still winning. Because of these two active pawns. But instead I played king to f1, still having an advantage, and the king comes forward, I bring in the rook. Maybe the king can enter here at some point, but I bring the king and my opponent trades the pawns. And what is the best move in this position? Do you see a way to blockade black's pawns on the queen side of the board? This doesn't work, because then I simply take, and then I have a pawn majority. So my opponent would like to break with a6 and b5. But can I prevent it? Yes. a4. Blocking any progress. So basically, I am a pawn up on the king side. Because if this, for example, goes here, I can simply take, and this pawn is so much faster, and my king will simply gobble up this pawn, and later gobble up these pawns. So, great setup for me. Here, king to f5, and now I bring in my king. It's very important in the endgame to bring in your king. It's all about the active king. If I were to ever get here, I can simply gobble up these pawns. But then I need to calculate every single move. Here, the move g5 and h3. h5, and now g3. Trying to go for f4 at some point. Here, my opponent plays the move g4, and I simply take it. And here there's two ways to actually win, f3 or f4, both winning on the spot. f4, and my opponent decides to take en passant, Great. I take back. And now I have a passed pawn. Maybe this king will go here, but I calculated it. And according to my calculations, my pawn would have been so much faster. King e5. And here I bring the pawn forward. And the king can either go here and never catch up. Right? Do you know the thing about the square? Well, this is the square you need to be in. If you're not inside of the square, then you cannot keep up with the pawn. So this move, then you're inside of the square and you're on time. And if you're not in the square, let's say a6 and now go here, the black king cannot come into the square and cannot stop me ever. So you can calculate the whole thing or just remember that the king needs to be inside of the square. The square is basically count the number of squares in front of your pawn and then make a square. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. A 4x4 matrix. So the king goes back to stay in the square and realize that it's not on time to go here. Now g6 would not work because then the king is simply on time, and this doesn't work because the king can simply, the king will simply go for my pawns instead. And this is a draw. We'll both have one pawn and this is a draw. So king to g4, the king goes on the defense, and basically the only thing you want to be aware of is that if black ever breaks with the pawns, you want to make sure that it cannot promote giving a check. So for example, king to g8, and let's say these kind of moves, a6, because black can break. Now this pawn will promote, although I'm faster anyway, right? But if my king would have been here and I would have lost the move, not really, but then it could be winning or at least equal for black, which is not the case now, because now I simply promote with the check first, and this is a checkmate. Instead here, the move a6, and I go to h7, and now the king cannot block this pawn anymore, and after b5, check, takes on a4, I simply promote the queen and give a check here, take the pawn, and black is not in time to promote, and in the end I will pick up all pawns and win the game. So keep these principles in mind and you'll increase your rating. Don't forget to like and subscribe. See you soon. Bye bye.